Welcome, Gyno-Curious listeners. I am Dr. Amy Novat. We are here to investigate what it means to be a healer and to be healed. When my work feels overwhelming and I feel ready to say, I've had enough, I can't handle anymore, I remind myself of the community of folks I work with, nurses and clinicians who I call colleagues, and some of them dear friends. Today, I have invited a woman I am so glad to call both. Dr. Elise Hagen is here to talk about why she chose OB-GYN as a specialty, what inspired her to birth babies and support women in their health care. Today, we are going to share a bit of ourselves and why we became lady doctors. Dr. Elise Hagen is a board-certified OB-GYN. Welcome, Elise.
Thank you.
It's lovely to have you. So I got to ask the question, why did you become an OB-GYN amongst all the other specialties? Why OB-GYN?
Well, I came to OB-GYN a little bit late in my life. Compared to most doctors, I think. I was in college and I wanted to study abroad, and I found myself in Eritrea. I had initially thought that I would be an anthropologist, very interested in culture and different cultures, a little bit at 6s and 7s, trying to figure out what I was going to do, what I was going to research, who I was going to talk to about what. And I ended up reading a book by Alice Walker called Possessing the Secret of Joy, which is a prequel to The Color Purple, which more people know. I hadn't read that at that time. So I just found it at the local British Council library and read it. And it was like the scales fell off my eyes. And I was walking around the capital city of Asmara and thinking to myself, I think a lot of these women have had this done. Female genital mutilation is what I'm talking about. So the Possessing the Secret of Joy goes back in the story from The Color Purple and talks about the origins of these characters coming from Africa, going through this procedure of female genital mutilation. And so I was thinking about culture and women's bodies and how we view health, and came back to college and realized that I didn't have enough time to become a doctor. So finished out my degree in history and worked in a nonprofit after I graduated and joined the Peace Corps after a couple of years just cooling my heels in Washington, D.C., and found myself in West Africa, delivered a baby in the Sahel in a village with no running water, no electricity, and I was hooked. So I knew I wanted to be an OB-GYN before I even really was clear that I wanted to go to medical school, and came back and started the whole long process. So here I am.
Great. Thank you. I am struck at how many of those of us who practice OB-GYN have the experience in the labor suite, kind of clinches it for us. There's something about the intimacy in the labor suite that I think is so unique. Moreover, I can speak to my own experience that one of the things that I loved about the labor floor is the cultural milieu, that in the room with an individual patient, you have access to her culture, her family, in a way that you don't have walking by them on the street, or perhaps even living in the same village as them, that the intimacy and the exposures of labor and delivery are just so unique. So my imaginings of you in this small village having this experience, and this being kind of the nidus, the crystallization of your aspirations, is just lovely.
It was an interesting delivery. The woman had come to, basically, it was the building with an autoclave that was run on a car battery, and it was staffed by a nurse. It was the only healthcare facility for 25,000 people in within walking distance, or she came in on an ox cart. And she came, and I was basically to catch her while the nurse was pressing on her belly to get the baby to come out because her labor had arrested. And I'm just wide-eyed and had no idea what I was doing, but he knew what he was doing, just had me there as the catcher. And afterwards, helping her breastfeed a little bit to try to get her uterus to contract. And she's looking at me, and I'm looking at her, and she speaks to me in French, which is the colonial language, and she says, "You're wearing pants." And I said, "Yep," thinking, okay, I'm holding your baby in one hand and your breast in the other hand, trying to connect them, and you're weirded out that I'm wearing pants. okay, fair enough. This is a weird day for both of us. So, it was fascinating and magical and interesting. And, the book that I was given as a Peace Corps volunteer is called Where There Is No Doctor. And so there is a lot of this, kind of if you're in a situation with a woman who's delivering and is bleeding, get the placenta out and encourage contractions. How do you do that? You breastfeed. So, I had read a little bit of that, but this is very basic, like where there is no medical care at all. Very little anyway. But her big focus was that I was a woman wearing pants.
Again, what becomes an area of focus in the delivery suite is always fascinating. So here we are, imagining you in this village where there is really basically very little or very primitive medical care. And here we are sitting in Rhiniecliff, New York, where clearly we have access to the most modern of medical interventions. So it's a long arc. And I'm wondering how it is now that you're practicing in a very modern setting and with all access to everything you might need. How does it feel? And are you still experiencing the joy and the revelation that you experienced in that hut?
Yeah, I think maybe the arc is a little shorter than we might imagine. Birth is one of the things that attracted me to this field is birth is birth. So it's medicalized here, but it is still a natural process. And I entered this field with really a goal toward shepherding the process and intervening where I needed to. But I certainly have had deliveries where, the birth center at the Northern Duchess Hospital did used to do, more before COVID, family-centered deliveries. And at some point, I did a delivery where there were multiple family members in the room, and I offered after the delivery for the dad to cut the cord. And he turned a little green, and his mom says to him, "Well, son, you brought your hunting knife." So maybe not that technical. But no, it is different. But like I said, the natural process is part of what appeals to me. Certainly, the joy is still there. The humor obviously is still there. And that's definitely what keeps me motivated. The deliveries, like you said, it's a nice window into a family's culture. And the deliveries can be intense or casual or and anything in between. Beautiful, sad, heartbreaking. Even when there's a healthy baby that's born, sometimes the circumstances are just difficult. And part of my interest is to be there for people.
You're talking about these universal themes that make us so human. And I appreciate your seeing that in the context of this microcosm, of this labor suite, labor delivery room, if you will. And it is this array of emotional content and experiential content, and yet there's a universality around how do we make babies and how do they come out and the realities of that biology, which I think is important to mention because what we do is science-based and universal biology-based.
Mm-hmm.
So you certainly tapped on some of the joys of being an OB-GYN. Can you talk about how it is to deliver hard news? So much of what we do also entails telling women they have cancer, helping a woman deliver a stillborn. These are life-changing events for our patients. How do you cope with that? How do you help yourself? How do you make sure that you're healthy and well throughout the harder times, too?
So I think self-care for a physician is a hot topic right now. Certainly in my own life, the hardships that I've been through, the times when I've just been devastated by my own circumstances in some form or other, I feel like my part of working through those is to recognize those moments in others and to just reach out. I may not have been through exactly what you're going through, but I remember that feeling of just being lost or just being hurt or just being devastated and just trying to meet people where they're at. Certainly, this field is rife with ethical issues, people meeting us in the beginning of a life, the end of a life, whether it's a fetal death or a death from cancer or a family member passing or a relationship dissolution or any number of things that can be just so hard, and trying to just use those times in my life that I've felt those things to reach out and be a human with that person and also be someone that they trust with this news, even though I'm relatively a stranger. I'm not their friend necessarily, but to be there and be supportive. And that, as hard as that can be, that does bring me some joy in my work and some satisfaction. And then the times that I really feel hurt by what someone else is going through, where we have a hard experience, a hard shared experience, like with a fetal death, let's say, I go home and I hug my own kids. And they're old enough now to know that sometimes things get really intense at work. And they're old enough to know some of the details, certainly HIPAA-protected details. But I think that window into my own self and my own life is a gift to my children. It helps them know me a little bit better. And certainly it helps me appreciate them because our lives are so unpredictable.
You're speaking of empathy, and it's a truly rewarding experience as a healer. And also having been a patient at one time, knowing that my clinician was being empathic around the experience makes the exchange so rich and rewarding and real and unadulterated by so much of the craziness that's going on in medicine today between, again, policy issues, hospital requirements, rules and regs that you and I both know they're pages and pages long. Paperwork, administrative stuff. So to be able to kind of be, the image I just had was back in the hut, on the ground, feeling your feet in the dirt, exchanging a look at your patient that is unfiltered and raw. That's what certainly drives me in my practice, and I know and I hear is what drives you. It's the gift of what we do, certainly. Which brings me to the challenges that particularly us OB-GYNs face around malpractice, and that our specialty is certainly one of the most litigious of the specialties. And how does that impact your day-to-day? And if you were to talk to a young person going into OB-GYN, what might you say about that?
So, that's a source of a lot of hurt feelings, I think. In my rational mind, I do try to remind myself that this is the system that's created to remunerate someone who has had an adverse outcome. It feels like blame. It feels like responsibility for what we do, which is definitely part of the joy of what we do, feeling like we can help. But the opposite side of that coin is sometimes we can hurt. And having it be litigious, having it be blame-oriented, like I said, that causes a lot of hurt feelings because I'm not coming at this work with anything other than the desire to help. So when it goes wrong and I feel blamed for it, that's unpleasant. That's extra hurtful. But I do try to just go back in my head to, this is the system that we have to help people who, by some chance, by some fault sometimes, intentional or not, this is the system. And so I try to just think, okay, so part of my life is malpractice insurance, and that is there to help people who need help. So it's tough though. And I think on a daily basis, I try not to think about it. I try not to let it guide me. I definitely have set up a scaffolding in my practice, in my algorithms of how I address problems to make sure that I'm not causing harm. Just that scaffolding of, am I crossing my T's and dotting my I's and making sure that I've done all of the things that I need to do, and then have I written it all down, because that's part of it. I really try not to let it bother me. I really try not to have it affect me, because I think that would be the end. If I were living under that burden, it would just feel too unpleasant to try to do anything. It would be paralyzing.
I agree. And also what it does is it impacts the way people practice insofar as being defensive all the time, which brings us into a kind of medical morass in that a lot of clinicians will order every possible test known to us, which of course feeds into the terrible financial situation that we find ourselves here in this country. It tends to lead to a lack of communication with patients. I'm just going to do a lot of tests, but I'm not going to really sit down and talk to you. And what science has shown is actually the doctors who are sued most are those who don't communicate with their patients. But on the other hand, I want to just tell a brief story about how all of us have to do these different courses, if you will, for medical malpractice, et cetera. And I remember about 5 or 6 years ago, I was listening to an interview through Milmick, which is a large insurance company, and they were interviewing a fellow who had sued his doctor. I forget if it was an internist or endocrinologist. And they asked him, why did he sue? And his answer was, because I could. And that kind of attitude, of course, has led to so many superfluous lawsuits. I absolutely agree with you. We need the opportunity for people to have an arena in which to let the world know they've been harmed, because unfortunately not all doctors are necessarily doing the right thing, or mistakes can happen. But it is certainly a difficult part of our world. And I'm so glad that you've created this scaffolding and techniques in which you can just do the work, stay tried and true, if you will, to your mission, and that you continue to communicate with your patients. And I would like to believe that, on the most part, will keep you safe and keep your patients safe. But I would say to a young person coming into the field that what strikes me so much in observing others who have been sued, and my own experience through the years, after practicing 32 years, it's inevitable, is the level of shame that we feel when we receive that letter from an attorney, and how important it is to create strategy to feel positive about the world that you work in and about yourself. Would you add anything to that in terms of the messaging to a younger clinician?
I think the pressure to be perfect, the assumption in any lawsuit is that there is fault, certainly damage, blame, all of those nasty words. And then a question of intent. Was it because you were ignorant, or you don't know, or your hand slipped, or something happened? And the real answer is, I'm human, and I don't walk on water, and I don't make miracles happen. I'm highly trained and I'm very skilled, but I am not perfect. And like I said, that's where I get into this very logical, trying to be logical. Like, this is the system we have. Some states have systems where one pays their malpractice insurance into a pot of money that remunerates patients who have been damaged without necessarily the individual, you were the doctor, this is your fault. So
Yeah. Thank you. I just have to get back to the question about a female genital mutilation. Are you seeing it in your practice here in Rhinebeck, New York?
It's been seen in the community a couple of times, I think, in the 11 years that I've been here. It's rare to see it here. Our immigrant population tends not to be from the places where it's happening. Certainly, when I was early in my career, I shadowed a general surgeon who worked out of Ohio State, who was called to assist with a patient that had this done. And so it was fascinating to talk with him about my conversations with women in East Africa and their families, these crazy, crazy conversations I would have over tea or coffee, asking people about their bodies and what had been done to them and why and what their beliefs were around it. And working through my feelings about, okay, so I'm a white girl. I was 19 at the time, living in a different culture and really trying not to be the ugly American, trying not to foist my own opinions, and thinking about American culture and what we do to women, what we do to minorities, what we do to men, what we do to each other that is so harmful, putting people in boxes and labeling them and shaving off parts of their bodies and all that stuff. So, so we don't see it much, but we definitely see shrapnel of all the things that we do. So I'm trying to take that, do we mutilate each other in different forms? Yeah, maybe not so overtly, so expressly, maybe not in that way, but in other ways.
Again, the practice of OB-GYN brings us so intimately up close to women and their bodies, and how to be respectful, practicing with integrity and respect is what we hope for all of our clinicians throughout the country and the world, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm thrilled that you are my friend and my partner in this work we do. and for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you also to my listeners for joining me as we venture into the limitless conversations about our bodies and the world of OB-GYN. I would love to hear from you. Please email your questions and comments to comments@radiofreerhiniecliff.org or call us at 845-307-7446. Also, thank you to my producers, Jen Hammoud and Matty Rosenberg. Until our next conversation, stay healthy and stand strong in your knowledge and your insights.